everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This is Glossyphilosophy. My name is Shanson Binman, and today you are tuned in for a book talk. Today's book that we are talking about is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and you can tell by my hands moving so quickly that I am really excited to talk about this book. My husband is also thrilled that we are talking about this book because I have been talking to him about this book for I think possibly a year. Last year, I just randomly saw the mini-series Wolf Hall, which is based on the first two books in the series by Hilary Mantel on PBS, and was completely blown away, and I quickly became obsessed with discovering more about these real people and whether or not the characters portrayed in the story were actually what they were like as real people, as far as we can tell. And I just knew that it needed to be part of the book talks, and last year I couldn't fit it in because I wanted to make sure that I spoke about at least two of the three books, as well as the biography on Thomas Cromwell. So here we go. Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel is just one of those books that you will want to read again and again, and it will always surprise you. There will always be some thread that you want to pull on. The first time I read this, I was like watching the mini-series in my head as I was reading, and I missed a lot of the extra detail that was in the book. The book, by the way, is just beyond worth it to read it, even if you've seen the mini-series, because there's just so much more going on the background. So obviously I would recommend it. My recommendation usually comes at the end of these book talks, but I obviously love it so much. So yes, I would recommend it. I'd recommend it to everybody. Okay, so we've covered why are we reading this and if I would recommend it. Let's just talk as quickly as we can about what this story is about. So, again, this is a fictional book. It is not real, but it is based on actual historical events and real people. The key players in this book are going to be Catherine of Aragon, King Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, Wolsey, Cardinal Wolsey, a little bit, Sir Thomas More, and the guy who the whole book is about, Thomas Cromwell. If you're thinking right now, who is Thomas Cromwell? You need to read this book and you need to read his biography because it will blow your mind. Okay, so those are kind of the key players. Let's try to do a quick synopsis of this book because there's so much detail, there's so much history going on at this particular moment. It is kind of an explosion of events that are happening all at once, and there's a lot that's going on in this book. So at the beginning of the book we meet Thomas Cromwell, who comes from humble origins. He's a blacksmith's son, and he is able to change his destiny. He learns to read, he learns to write, he is just brilliant. He becomes a lawyer, he becomes a merchant, he becomes a trader. He becomes a trader of cloth and other goods and services. He finds himself working for Cardinal Wolsey, who is King Henry VIII's right-hand man. But he's so much more than that. Cardinal Wolsey is really the guy who's running England and is running diplomatic missions between not only the religious section in Western Europe, between the Pope and all of Catholicism in England, but also between the aristocracies, and he's preventing wars and he's causing wars and he's basically in charge. Okay, so Thomas Cromwell finds himself working for Wolsey. They get along really well. He's also doing things on the side to keep up his trade in wool and other things that he's doing. Wolsey is unable to get King Henry VIII a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, whom he's been married to for about 20 years at this point. And Henry VIII, desperately wants to be done with his marriage. He wants to move on. He is obsessed with a woman named Anne Boleyn. And he thinks that his marriage is cursed because he took his brother's wife. Catherine of Aragon was married to his brother Arthur, who passed away at a very young age. And there's another religious thing that also ties into this. Henry VIII wants to break away from the Pope and a little bit mix it up with Catholicism. Also, side note, at this time, Luther is on the scene and has petitioned against the Catholic Church and is raising lots and lots of questions. So it's just a very tumultuous time. Cardinal Wolsey goes down. He's not doing well. Henry VIII is done with him. He wants his marriage over with. Cardinal Wolsey can't handle the job, so he's sent to the Tower, but on his way to the Tower, he doesn't make it, so he passes away. In steps Thomas Cromwell, who was Wolsey's right-hand man, and he begins this incredible rise in Henry VIII's court, which was unheard of. So even though Cardinal Wolsey also had a humble origin and rose really, really high, Thomas Cromwell started even lower, socially, economically, everything, and finds himself at the end of the book in a very similar position to Cardinal Wolsey, and will continue to rise through Bring Up the Bodies, which is book 2, which we will cover in a few months, and then even more in book 3, and then it doesn't end well for him. So spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for Thomas Cromwell, but he has a really incredible ride for a while. So that is kind of a quick synopsis of what's going on. It's really about getting King Henry VIII a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, bringing in Anne Boleyn and making her queen, breaking away from the church, and all these other events that are also happening. Okay? So again, I have to emphasize that this is a work of fiction. All of the conversations that Hilary Mantel writes, we don't know if those are actually true. She is a brilliant writer. She writes essays and book reviews for the New York Times. She also writes for a bunch of London newspapers. So now that we know a little bit more about the author, a little bit about the synopsis of the book, and history versus fiction, let's get into the actual book. Something that I think Hilary Mantel is just so brilliant at. There's a few things that she does. So we know that Anne Boleyn is supposed to be the evil character. She's kicking out the old queen. She's completely changing the religion of England, which, is whatever you believe is what you believe. But it is definitely a pressure point in the book. She's basically having the king wipe out a bunch of people who don't agree with them. And when I say wipe out, I literally mean donezo. And then there's just all this discussion about her kind of behind her back and all these rumors going on, and you're just who is this chick? And I love the fact that Hilary Mantel doesn't make her prime character, Thomas Cromwell, meet Anne until well into page 100. So I think it's somewhere between page 120, 130, somewhere in there, at least in this edition, that's when he finally meets her. And before he meets her, Anne's sister runs out to meet Thomas Cromwell and says, don't look her in the eye. Don't do anything for her. Don't fall under her spell. She is trouble. So you've got all this information about her and all these rumors about her before you even see her. I mean, it's just a brilliant setup for a villain, okay? And then the other thing that I found so interesting was that she turned Sir Thomas More into a villain. Like a villain. No matter what you thought you knew about Sir Thomas More before you read this, she flips it on its head. So that was so shocking. Again, I don't know enough about him to be able to speak to that, but it does make me want to reread Utopia, which is in his own words, and it does make me want to reread A Man for All Seasons, and I've also been trying to find a biography on Sir Thomas More, and it's really, really hard. I think I've only been able to find one so far. So I think I'm going to give it a shot, and we'll see. I'll try to report back if I can about what's real, what's not, but just so interesting that she goes after somebody so well known and who's actually written in his own words, and we have documentation, and she turns him into a villain even though he's a saint in Catholicism. Just so good. And then Henry VIII, the character of Henry VIII. When I initially started this book series, I hated Henry VIII so much because I grew up on Anne of a Thousand Days, this old movie that just made Anne Boleyn like the tragic heroine, and King Henry VIII, this greedy guy. But reading this, I'm constantly flipping and changing my mind. By the end of the series, I don't like him. I still don't like him. He was so cruel. He ends up being really, really cruel to people and just like shutting them down, ending their lives over like one misstep, which is really intense. But in the beginning, when he is petitioning and trying to have Cardinal Wolsey get his marriage annulled or get a divorce, anything so that he can move on and produce an heir, which he hasn't been able to do with Catherine of Aragon, I do feel for the guy because this is like the one thing that he's supposed to do and he can't get it done. And back then they had no idea about proper care of pregnancy, of delivering a child. So you just don't know what was actually going on. We don't really know about Catherine of Aragon's like fertility health and what that's all about. So no blame on her. And same with Anne. Anne goes through several miscarriages, and you're just like, the women are getting all the blame, and Henry is just floating by and finding new women constantly. And you're just like, I don't like him, but I also know that he has this one duty to do, and he can't do it, and that must be so frustrating and so scary. And I love when the other courtiers talk about, including Thomas Cromwell, what are we going to do if he can't produce an heir? And back then, they only wanted male heirs. They didn't want female heirs, which is also amazing that Anne Boleyn's child, Elizabeth, becomes Queen Elizabeth eventually and just knocks it out of the park for a very long time. So weird. I just keep telling my husband, like, you can't make this stuff up. It's bananas that so much of this is actually real and based on truth. And then Hilary Mantel just adds in those conversations and makes the people more three-dimensional and real, and you're just caught up in this incredible, crazy time period and story, and it is just so well done. I also love how she's written Thomas Cromwell. He's a guy who, again, rises from nothing, according to this, from an abusive family and an abusive childhood to becoming like the right-hand guy of King Henry VIII. He becomes super wealthy, like ridiculously wealthy. He is the guy that makes stuff happen, and just his mental capacity for remembering things and just his go-getter attitude, it's inspiring, it's incredible. And I also love that in the past, Thomas Cromwell has been written off as this really like conniving and scheming guy, and she really dug into history and tried to find a different way to tell his story, and now biographies are being written about him that would never have been written about him before because of this book. That is like, that in and of itself is inspiring, that Hilary Mantel has created this little ripple and interest that has become a tsunami for the Renaissance, King Henry VIII's court, and most importantly, Thomas Cromwell, who definitely should be researched and talked about more. So again, would I recommend this book? Yes, absolutely. Even if you don't know any of the history going on, you should probably know a little bit before you start, but you don't have to know a lot because they're going to cover so much of that in here. And then I swear you will start reading it and you'll just get sucked in and you won't want to put it down. And even myself, who knows the outcome of all of these characters, I'm still shocked and surprised. And that is just how good the writing is. So brilliant. Well done, Hilary Mantel. Definitely 100% recommend it. Thank you guys so much for watching this book talk. This is a book that has been near and dear to my heart for about a year now, and I'm so thrilled to be able to talk about it with you and just get the word out again and get the hype up again, hopefully, and have people get excited about the Renaissance, get excited about Thomas Cromwell and Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII and all the craziness that's going on right then. So normally I do fashion videos every Wednesday, beauty videos every Friday. On Mondays I have more concentrated topics on fashion and beauty, and then of course sometimes I do book talk. So thank you again for watching. I hope this inspires you to grab this book and give it a try. Let me know in the comments if you do. Give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe, and I will see you very soon. Bye.